Coming up, Luka gets the Mavs past the Nets, and Steph wills the Warriors to a win. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in. You're listening to Locked On Game to Game NBA. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. Make sure you check out Locked On NBA on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts from. We have all of our NBA hosts here to recap the action for you from last night in the NBA. The Nets and Mavericks went back and forth on Monday with Luka Doncic getting the last laugh in a 2-point Dallas win. Our hosts with Locked On Mavs and Nets go over the narrow win in Dallas.
The Dallas Mavericks get another clutch win. Nick Angstead from the Locked On Mavericks podcast here, and Luka Doncic goes off for 36 points, 6 boards, 6 assists. His 8th straight game to start the season with 30-plus points. Only Wilt Chamberlain has done that in more games to start the season. An incredible mark, but in this game, it was the trapping and it was the doubling from Brooklyn that forced Luka's hand and allowed Josh Green 16 points, close to his career high. An incredible game from him. He ended up closing the game late for the Mavericks, and just some bad decision-making, bad turnovers back and forth forced this game to be closer than it should have been. About 10-point lead with about 2 minutes left for the Mavericks, and they just stopped playing offense. They stopped playing exactly where they need to play, and they had some mistakes. Kevin Durant's going to take advantage of those mistakes for Brooklyn. He had an incredible game, guarded Luka Doncic for the entire second half. An incredible effort from KD, but the Mavericks were able to pull this one off in the clutch. Whew.
You may not have expected the Brooklyn Nets in their current form to be able to take on the Dallas Mavericks, especially on the road, and yet that is exactly what happened tonight. It came down to the wire. I am Adam Warnbrecht with the Locked On Nets podcast, and this one, the second meeting, the conclusion of the season series between these two teams, certainly had all the elements of it. Big performance from Luka, Kevin Durant taking over at times, but ultimately, this thing got chippy. This one got physical, and it grinded down in that fourth quarter. A lot of stoppages, a lot of back and forth. Technical foul for Kevin Durant came down to making free throws, 62 consecutive for Kevin Durant, and that came to an end tonight. The Nets come up just short, but in some ways, off of 2 straight wins and battling Dallas, maybe there is still a sense that this team can get this season on track in spite of falling to 4-7. Things to like, concerns to be had around Ben Simmons, but that is the nature of a tumultuous season for the Brooklyn Nets. You can check out the full breakdown of the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.
The Warriors had started this season slow, but they've been able to find some consistency at home. Every win of Golden State's season so far has come in San Francisco, and the Warriors picked up another one last night, this time against the Kings. Locked On Warriors says this one was because of a great night from the former MVP.
The Golden State Warriors snapped a 5-game losing streak at Chase Center thanks to an MVP caliber performance from Steph Curry. I'm Cyrus Sauces with your Locked On Warriors Locked On Now recap of the defending world champions beating the Sacramento Kings in a nail-biter, 116-113. The Warriors trailed most of the game and entered the final quarter down by 9. Steph, fighting through the pain of a rolled ankle, had a monster performance, scoring 47 points, grabbing 8 rebounds, dishing 8 assists, going 17 of 24 from the field, 7 of 12 from beyond the arc. It was Steph's 57th career regular season 40-point game, and he's now scored 30 or more in 8 of his first 10 games this season. The Warriors improved to 4-7 on the year, and they don't play again until Friday when they host the Cleveland Cavaliers. Kylan Mills joins me tomorrow to break it down. Follow the program on Twitter at Locked On Dubs.
The Cleveland Cavaliers came up just short of beating the Los Angeles Clippers on Monday night, coming up just a pair of points short in LA. Locked On Cavs goes over what cost the young team this loss on the road.
Hey everyone, Evan Demerol here, co-host of Locked On Cavs with a Locked On Now takeaway after the Cleveland Cavaliers 119-117 loss on Monday night to the Los Angeles Clippers. Well, all good things got to come to an end, I guess, and that means the Cleveland Cavaliers had to finally put on some clothes because they're done streaking for now. In this loss to the Clippers, you saw a lot of the youth and inexperience kind of rear its head down the stretch for the Cavs with a couple costly turnovers from Darius Garland. But on an individual level, Donovan Mitchell had 30 points, Darius Garland had 19 and 12, Jared Allen had 20 rebounds, including 16 on defense, 4 on offense, and Evan Mobley had 26 points before fouling out. A lot of impressive individual performances, but if you're the Cavs at the end of the day, you're not happy at the end result. We'll be talking about this and more, and maybe what the Cavs can do as they shift focus to the Sacramento Kings on Wednesday. On Tuesday's Locked On Cavs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Portland won a thriller in Miami at the last second with a game winner, giving the Trailblazers a victory just seconds after the Heat had tied the score. Locked On Blazers goes over this dramatic finish.
For the second time in 3 games, the Blazers win on a walk-off buzzer beater. This one a corner three-pointer to give Portland the win, 110-107 in Miami. I'm Mike Richmond, host of Locked On Blazers, and this one changed in the final 6 minutes. Chauncey Billups elected to pull Yusuf Nurkic, close with a small ball lineup, and the Blazers, all they did was finish the game perfectly in the final half of a quarter. 8 for 8 from the field, 6 of 7 from the free throw line, and they punched back when Max Strus hit a three-pointer in the corner to tie the game. The Blazers didn't take a timeout. They pushed the other way, and Damian Lillard found Josh Hart wide open in the left-hand corner. Buckets, ball game. The Blazers win again, and the Blazers are getting game winners from non-Damian Lillards. They're tapping their wrists, and it's not even Dame time. This team's clutch.
The Boston Celtics have now won 3 games in a row after they took down the Memphis Grizzlies on Monday. Jayson Tatum put together what our Locked On Celtics host called an MVP performance in Boston's win.
Memphis made it interesting, but the Boston Celtics have now won 3 straight. I'm John Corrales of the Locked On Celtics podcast. 2 reasons why the Celtics won this game. Number 1, Jayson Tatum, MVP level performance, 39 points. The impressive part about this is that he didn't shoot well from 3. Only 3 of 11, but 12 of 16 from the line. Another 16 free throws. Jayson Tatum is leveling up, getting to the rim aggressively, and getting the foul calls that he hasn't gotten in the past. Then Marcus Smart, 12 assists after an 11 assist night and a couple of turnovers. He's only had 3 turnovers and 23 assists in the last 2 games. He was brilliant. Memphis made a late run. The Celtics were able to hold them off. They are now 7-3, 3 in a row. And I'm going to be talking about it on the Locked On Celtics podcast.
Coming up, the Utah Jazz are officially the best team in the West. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA. Today's edition of Locked On Game to Game is brought to you by Sweatblock. There is nothing worse than being embarrassed or having embarrassing sweating going on. And that's where Sweatblock comes in. They are your super helper. They have a little secret for your confidence. The Sweatblock wipes work up to 7 days per use. So you apply them on a Sunday, you will stay dry all week long. If you or someone you love is experiencing embarrassing sweat or odor, you want to try Sweatblock. You save 20% with our promo code Locked On at sweatblock.com. It's also available on Amazon. Welcome back to Locked On Game to Game NBA. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. The New York Knicks used the 3 to beat the Timberwolves on Monday night. New York hit 19 from behind the arc on their way to a win. And our Locked On Knicks host tells you more on how New York found its rhythm shooting.
The Knicks win 120-107 over the Minnesota Timberwolves. And talk about learning your lesson. The Knicks talked about it, specifically Julius Randle after the game, that after getting lit up by the Celtics the other day for 27 three-pointers, the Knicks talked about how maybe they should start doing that too. And they take 48 threes in this game, make 19 of them, good for 40%. And Randle was the biggest part of it, making 8 of 13. Fantastic game for him, setting the tone early. Fantastic game for the Knicks overall, responding to a tough loss the other night to the Celtics by coming out against the Timberwolves and doing basically the same thing that happened to them the other day. So plus playing a little small with Obi Toppin and Julius Randle. So all good things. You can hear more about it on Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast.
The Hawks took down the Milwaukee Bucks and beat them badly yesterday by 19 points in Atlanta. Locked On Hawks tells you what got into Trae Young and the rest of the roster to pull off a huge win and handing Milwaukee their first loss of the season.
Hello, friends. My name is Brad Rowland, and I'm here at State Farm Arena talking about the Atlanta Hawks and what was a pretty fantastic win for the team on this fine Monday evening. The Hawks were trailing the entirety of the first half, got by as many as 14 points in the first half, and without Trae Young, things looked relatively bleak for the Hawks at home. But then they came back in a furious second half push led by rookie AJ Griffin, as well as a fantastic bench effort from across the board. DeJounte Murray leading the way as well with the starters. And the Hawks dethroned the Milwaukee Bucks with their first loss of the season. Atlanta did a great job on the margins in this game. They made enough threes down the stretch of the contest, and importantly, held Milwaukee's offense in check, held them to less than a point per possession in the entire game. And the Hawks played a very strong across-the-board performance without their best player in this spot. We'll have full coverage of the game and much more coming up on the Locked On Hawks podcast.
Myles Turner turned in one of the best games of his career thus far in Indiana last night. The versatile big man scored 37 points to go with a 12-rebound night and also a win over the Pelicans. Locked On Pacers recaps the victory.
Tony East, host of Locked On Pacers, here inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse, where the Pacers just handled the New Orleans Pelicans on their way to a 129-122 win. And Myles Turner showed what he can do at his absolute best in this game. 37 points, the second most he's scored in a single game in his entire career. 12 rebounds, 3 blocks as the Pacers beat the Pelicans, and he eclipsed 1,000 career blocks in this game. Did it all on both ends. Defended Zion Williamson, hit some threes, was their post-up man down the stretch, and 11 shots from the foul line. Turner was truly excellent in this game. Tyrese Halliburton had a double-double as well. Pacers, one of their most complete performances of the season, beating the Western Conference team that has been pretty good this year in New Orleans. So Pacers have a lot to build on in this game, and they're back to 500 for the first time since February of 2021. We'll break all that down and more on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
The Rockets won on the road for the first time this season, a 9-point victory over the Magic thanks to a big night from Jalen Green. Locked On Rockets tells us more.
The Houston Rockets earned their second win of the season behind a monster night from Jalen Green against the Orlando Magic. What's up? This is Jackson Gatlin from Locked On Rockets. In the battle of two tanking teams, the Rockets emerged victorious behind Jalen Green's 34-point performance, scoring at all 3 levels against the Orlando Magic. This was a great breakout game from Jalen Green, who's been struggling in the better part of this early season for the Houston Rockets. Key contributions from everybody on this Rockets roster, responding to some big runs by the Orlando Magic in the fourth quarter. At one point, the Magic cutting the game to 5. Rockets go on a 12-0 run after that. Then the Magic cut back into the lead yet again later on in the fourth quarter. Ultimately, Jalen Green sealing this thing with 2 clutch free throws down the stretch. Now, the one negative for the Rockets in this game, very little to almost no contribution from their third overall selection, Jabari Smith Jr., who did just miss this last week due to illness, some flu-like symptoms, but looked out of sorts, out of rhythm, and didn't play a single minute in the fourth quarter. We're going to break down this entire thing for you over at Locked On Rockets.
With a dominant win over the Lakers on Monday, the Utah Jazz sit at the top of the Western Conference standings, still undefeated at home. Locked On Jazz goes over everything that's been going right in Utah.
The Utah Jazz are the number 1 team in the West after a blowout win of the Los Angeles Lakers, 139-116. David Locke with you here of Locked On Jazz. Well, we all saw this coming, right? The Jazz would be 9-3 to start the year and have the best record in the Western Conference. This was an offensive explosion, 76-71 at the half. At the end of 3 quarters, the Jazz offensive rating was a 151 as they scored 115 points against the LeBron-less Lakers, and they just kept rolling. 7 players in double figures. Lauri Markkanen with 23 on 10 of 15 shooting. Mike Conley dimed out 12 assists in 24 minutes, and the balanced attack of the Utah Jazz continues to stun the NBA as they move to 9-3 on the season. They take 38 threes tonight. They make 16 of them. They make 42%. They're just rolling right now. They head east for 3 games. We'll see if it keeps going. More on Locked On Jazz.
The Charlotte Hornets were never able to overcome and recover from a slow start against the Wizards last night, and our Locked On Hornets host goes over why Charlotte came up short.
A Hornets team without LaMelo Ball continues to shoot poorly from 3 and continues to lose. I'm Doug Branson from the Locked On Hornets podcast. The Hornets dropped their 5th straight contest, this time to the Washington Wizards, a Wizards team, by the way, without Bradley Beal, and a Wizards team that has not won a game in Charlotte since 2017. But the Hornets lose this one, and the story is pretty simple. They shot 5 of 32 from beyond the arc. That's 15% if you're counting. That was not enough to beat the Wizards. A lot of those missed threes turned into transition opportunities for the Wizards, and they win the game despite the Hornets winning the battle in the paint by a lot, 70-58. They win the second chance points battle. They won the fast break points battle, but it wasn't enough. The Wizards get the win, and the Charlotte Hornets desperately need LaMelo Ball and his three-point shooting back in the lineup. For more on the Charlotte Hornets, make sure you're following Locked On Hornets on the Locked On Podcast Network.
That's all for today on Locked On Game to Game NBA. Thank you so much for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On NBA and your favorite team's Locked On podcast on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts. I'm Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.